Welcome back. I'm Dr. Cheek and I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. And today is another installment of We Need to Talk. And what we need to talk about today is the use of the statement, "My therapist said." And I want to start by saying I've had many clients that have either came back into the office after an appointment and said that they've said, "My therapist has said," to a partner, a family member, a friend. I've had people in session who would want to practice with being able to have a discussion with a significant other when they're wanting to have a difficult conversation or when they're wanting to have or express their desires or their needs or make a request. And we're practicing in session them saying, "My therapist said," and that's how they start. And even in session, I am very adamant about not using that statement and simply stating what your desires are, what your needs are, primarily from you. And I take a stance that I want people to remove that statement when they're trying to make a request, when they're trying to have a difficult conversation, because when you add that to your request or what you're trying to say, it takes the focus off what you're actually needing and it puts the focus on what a third party deems is necessary in a relationship that the third party is only privy to one side of that relationship. That's a part of what we need to talk about. And I'm going to talk about 3 reasons why I take the stance of removing "my therapist said" from a statement or a request that you're making to another individual or in relationship with someone, whether it's your parents, your significant other, your boss, your children, whoever you're trying to have this conversation with. I take the stance of removing that statement and simply saying what your thoughts are and what your needs are. And one reason I say that is because when we use the statement, "My therapist says," it has the potential to devalue your own voice. And what I mean by that is when we use an external party or an external person to validate our internalized experience, we lose our own voice in that process because we're then relying on someone else to validate an experience that they are not experiencing, that they can empathize with or even sympathize with, but they are not feeling that internalized experience that you're feeling, but you are giving that person's word more value than your own and saying how you're feeling, what you're needing, and what you're wanting. When we say "my therapist said," it's saying, I'm saying this person validated what I said because maybe there's a part of me that doesn't feel like what I'm asking for is valid. Maybe there's a part of me that doesn't feel like I have enough value to this person that I'm talking to. My voice doesn't carry enough weight with the individuals I'm engaging with that if I simply make the request or if I simply tell them how my internalized experience is, then they won't listen. So if I add "my therapist says," then it gives my voice more value. And we can start in that way devaluing our own voice because we learn not to validate our own experiences, but we learn to rely on an external or an outside party to validate what we're thinking and what we're feeling. And sometimes it's helpful to get a second opinion. Do not get me wrong. However, we can't go into a complicated conversation with the idea that I'm going to devalue what I need in this moment and simply tell you someone else agreed with me that how I'm feeling is how I'm feeling, which is basically what it's saying sometimes. And it's okay to simply say, "This is how I'm feeling," without having any validation from anyone else. We have to learn to validate ourselves sometimes and not always seeking outside opinions, outside advice, outside validation for internalized experiences. My second problem with that statement is that it takes away, in some cases, the accountability, the responsibility, or the validity of the person making the request or expressing their thoughts or their emotions. What I mean by this is that when you make a statement such as "my therapist said," or you say "my therapist said that this is a valid request," or "this is valid how I'm feeling," what you're then saying is, if you don't believe me, or if we go through with this plan that I'm saying my therapist has already said is okay and it makes sense, then when it doesn't work out, then I'm not accountable for the outcome. I don't have to take responsibility for the outcome. And it's not really helpful in those moments when we take accountability or responsibility from ourselves for choices or decisions or requests that we're making. And if you make a request, own it. If it doesn't work out, own it. If it doesn't go how you want it to go, own the fact that that is what you wanted and or what you needed in those moments. And it's okay if it doesn't work out. Can you make adjustments? glance, now that it hasn't worked out, can you see what might need to be changed, what might need to be tweaked a little bit? Can you see what has to happen differently in order for you to get the outcome that you need? When we say our therapist says, we take accountability away sometimes, we take responsibility away sometimes. So when it doesn't work out, instead of us looking at the outcome and saying, what can I do differently? We'll look at the outcome and say, well, I probably shouldn't have took their advice. Their advice was faulty. I don't have to take accountability or responsibility because I was just doing what my therapist said. And then the last reason I kind of shy away from, or I have clients remove that statement altogether of my therapist says when they're wanting to express a deep concern that they're having or making a request from others. The last reason I do that is because when we make that statement, it can be viewed by the recipient or the person on the receiving end as a manipulation, or the statement can genuinely be used as a manipulation. And what I'm saying is that when we make that statement, my therapist said, then to someone who's listening to what you are saying that you want, or maybe what you need, or you're explaining to someone your internalized feelings or how you're receiving them and how you want to engage with them. And then you bring in a third party of my therapist, and my therapist says, the person receiving that message may view the use of my therapist says as a manipulation to try to get them to agree. You're bringing someone in who maybe has the credentials that gives them greater power, that may make you view what they're saying in a more open way. Because if it's coming from a therapist, then that therapist must know what they're talking about, right? They have the degrees to prove it. They've done the training. They've done the work. So if the therapist said it, it must be right. It must be what we need to do. But when you're on the receiving end of that my therapist said statement, sometimes it can be viewed or misinterpreted as a manipulation. It could be seen as you're using that to validate something that feels invalid for them. They could view it as you're using it to further manipulate them, to get them to do what you want them to do, when they've already said maybe they don't want to do it. Maybe they've said they've heard how you felt and they've responded how they're going to respond. And now it feels like a manipulation. And some people truly use my therapist said as a manipulation. I've heard when someone has said, a therapist has said that. I've heard when people come back to me and say, I told such and such, my therapist said, and I'm in the office like, who is your therapist that said that? Like, who told you to say that to somebody? Who told you to kind of, who is your therapist? You need to get a new therapist. And I'm sitting there like, oh, me. I said that. That's what you said. I said. Okay. I don't recall saying that. I'm going to go out on a limb and say I probably would never say that. So in those moments, it's like, that's neither what I said, nor meant, nor explained when we were having this conversation in session. And I will correct people when they come back and say, my therapist said, or my therapist did, or my therapist told me I should, or however you want to put that statement. And what's following it is rarely, sometimes it is, but it's rarely what the therapist has said, what the therapist meant, or what the therapist explained as it related to what you're experiencing. So in those instances, the use of my therapist followed by said, thought, said I should, told me to, followed by a misperception or miscommunication of what was actually said in therapy sessions is a manipulation, and can be and probably will be viewed as a manipulation from others or towards others that's receiving this message, whether it's a message of concern that you're feeling about the relationship or something that you're dealing with, or it's simply your request or something that you need or you want from the dynamic between you and another person. Some people actually do mean it as a manipulation, and it's not okay, but it's going to happen, and we can't change it, but we can encourage that when you do use that phrase, at least be willing to have that conversation with the therapist before actually presenting that to someone else. That way you can have better language of how you want to communicate your desires, your concerns, your requests to another person. So you don't have to devalue your voice. So you don't have to be viewed as someone who's trying to manipulate a situation. Have the conversation, learn to value your voice, learn to value your concerns, learn to actually be able to state your needs clearly and concisely so people can hear you, so you don't need an external party to validate your internal experiences. And this is why we needed to talk, because that statement does get used a lot. And I want us to learn to validate validate ourselves. I want us to get to a place where we can reach out for a second opinion. We can get input from others to make sure how we're feeling or how we're seeing the situation is accurate and it's valid for what we are feeling and seeing in the moment. And we do that all the time. And I don't want you to ever stop doing that. But I don't want you to take that third party's word and view of your situation and use it as the primary reason you feel comfortable expressing your concerns or making a request. Value yourself, value your own needs and your own concerns and your own desires, value your own voice. You can communicate what you're needing better than most because you are living in that experience. Get a second opinion, yes, but communicate from the position of your own feelings and experience to express your needs to someone else. Be willing to say it with your whole chest. And we needed to talk because you have the voice and your voice matters. Whether anyone else co-signs what you're feeling or thinking or believe or requesting, your voice matters. As always, I hope you take something from this video today that was helpful, that was informative, that gave you the information you needed. Please feel free to jot down any thoughts, questions, or comments you have below. I thank you for taking the time to listen, and I'll be seeing you again very soon. Thank you.